On May 22, 2025, German Leopard tanks rolled through the streets of Vilnius, Lithuania. Chancellor Friedrich Merz stood watching in the city's cathedral square as nearly 5,000 soldiers prepared to take up permanent positions just kilometers from the Belarus border. It was a sight that had not been witnessed since 1945, Germany stationing combat troops on foreign soil. 80 years of military restraint, undone in a single ceremony. The message was unmistakable. Germany was finally taking European defense seriously. Modern tanks, advanced infantry fighting vehicles, a multi-billion euro commitment that politicians called the beacon project of Berlin's defense transformation. But behind the ceremony and the symbolism, military planners were doing different calculations entirely. When researchers at the RAND Corporation wargamed a Russian assault on the Baltics, they concluded NATO would need at least 7 brigades to prevent the rapid overrun of the region. Germany is sending 1. Even with every other NATO commitment fully implemented, the alliance will have 4. This is the story of why Europe's most historic military deployment in decades might still not be enough, and what that gap means for the future of NATO's eastern frontier. Before we dive in, if you are interested in geopolitics and military analysis, consider subscribing and dropping a like. It really helps the channel. Now let's get into it. To understand why Germany's deployment matters and why it might still fall short, we need to start with what exactly Berlin is sending to Lithuania. The unit is called the 45th Panzer Brigade, nicknamed the Lithuania Brigade. It officially activated on April 1st, 2025, making it Germany's first permanent combat formation stationed abroad since the end of World War II. The brigade will eventually comprise 4,800 military personnel plus 200 civilians, with full operational capability targeted for the end of 2027. This is not a token gesture. The 45th brings serious firepower. The 203rd Panzer Battalion contributes 44 Leopard 2A7 main battle tanks, among the most capable armored vehicles in NATO's inventory, with the brigade receiving priority for incoming Leopard 2A8 deliveries starting in 2027. The 122nd Panzer Grenadier Battalion brings 44 Puma S1 infantry fighting vehicles, Germany's most advanced, featuring 30mm cannons with airburst ammunition and Spike anti-tank missiles. Artillery support comes from PZH 2,000 155mm self-propelled howitzers, widely considered among the finest in the world. The price tag reflects the seriousness of the commitment. Germany is spending an estimated 6 to 9 billion euros in a one-time investment, primarily for weapons procurement, plus 800 million to 1 billion euros annually in operating costs. Lithuania itself is contributing 1.7 billion euros to build the infrastructure, including the primary base at Rudninkai training area, just 10 to 12 kilometers from the Belarus border. When complete, it will be Lithuania's largest military installation in history. Chancellor Merz put it bluntly at the inauguration ceremony, "Protecting Vilnius is protecting Berlin." But here is where the math starts to get uncomfortable. Germany's brigade represents a significant upgrade from what NATO had in the region just 3 years ago. Before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, NATO's enhanced forward presence consisted of 4 battalion-sized battle groups of roughly 1,000 troops each, scattered across Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. These were deliberately designed as tripwires, not defensive forces. Their purpose was never to stop a Russian advance, but to ensure that any attack would immediately involve forces from multiple NATO nations, triggering Article 5. The 2022 Madrid summit changed the calculus. NATO committed to scaling those battle groups to brigade strength, roughly 3,000 to 5,000 troops each. Germany's deployment represents the largest and most capable of these enhanced formations. Yet even with this upgrade, the total NATO forward deployed forces in the Baltic region number somewhere between 10,000 and 15,000 troops today, scaling toward perhaps 20,000 by 2027 when full implementation is complete. 20,000 sounds substantial until you consider what they might face. Kaliningrad sits just 100 kilometers from Lithuania's capital. The 11th Army Corps stationed there had an estimated 8,500 to 12,600 troops before the Ukraine war, equipped with Iskander missiles capable of hitting Warsaw in minutes and Berlin with extended range variants. More critically, Kaliningrad hosts S-400 air defense systems with a 400-kilometer range capable of denying NATO air power across much of the Baltic region, and Kaliningrad is just the forward outpost. Russia's military presence near the Baltics, while depleted by Ukraine operations, can be reinforced far more quickly than NATO can move additional forces into the theater. This brings us to the strategic nightmare that keeps NATO planners awake at night: Suwalki Gap. This 65-kilometer corridor along the Polish-Lithuanian border represents the only ground route connecting the Baltic states to the rest of NATO. To the west sits Russian Kaliningrad. To the east sits Belarus, which has effectively become a Russian military staging area. If Russian forces seize this narrow land bridge, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania would be cut off from overland reinforcement entirely. So the question isn't just whether 5,000 German troops can hold Lithuania, it's whether they can hold long enough for reinforcements to arrive, and whether those reinforcements could even get there. The RAND war games that shaped this entire debate were conducted between 2014 and 2016, using military experts playing both sides across multiple tabletop exercises. The methodology was rigorous. The conclusions were alarming. In every iteration, Russian forces achieved their objectives within 36 to 60 hours. The researchers concluded that, as currently postured, NATO cannot successfully defend the territory of its most exposed members. Their prescription called for 7 brigades, including 3 heavy armored brigades, adequately supported by air power and artillery, at an estimated annual cost of $2.7 billion. Without such forces, RAND warned that NATO would face only bad options: a bloody counteroffensive fraught with escalatory risk, a decision to escalate itself potentially with nuclear implications, or conceding at least temporary defeat. 7 brigades. Germany is sending 1. Even with all 4 enhanced forward presence formations reaching full strength, NATO would have 4 brigades in the Baltics, still far short of RAND's minimum threshold. But the situation has evolved since 2016, and not entirely in Russia's favor. 3 years of war in Ukraine have fundamentally transformed Russia's military posture. According to Ukrainian Commander Syrsky's April 2025 assessment, Russia currently has approximately 623,000 troops deployed in Ukraine. Monthly recruitment runs at roughly 30,000 new soldiers, with signing bonuses reaching 22 times the average monthly wage. Russia's tank fleet has suffered extraordinary attrition, with losses exceeding 3,000 destroyed since February 2022, more than the entire pre-war active inventory. Storage depots have been systematically depleted from 7,342 tanks at the end of 2021 to approximately 3,517 by late 2024, with only around 500 in good condition. This sounds encouraging until you consider Russia's industrial adaptation. Despite Western sanctions, Russian factories have ramped production dramatically. Tank output, combining refurbished Soviet-era vehicles with new production, runs at an estimated 1,000 to 1,200 units annually. Artillery ammunition production represents the most dramatic achievement. Output has surged from roughly 400,000 rounds annually in 2022 to an estimated 3 to 4 million rounds per year. Russia now produces in 3 months what the entire European Union produces in a year. German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius delivered this sobering comparison directly. The former Western Military District, which historically contained the forces most relevant to Baltic operations, has been severely depleted by Ukraine. Most units from the 1st Guards Tank Army, 6th Combined Arms Army, and 20th Combined Arms Army are engaged in the fighting and have suffered 50 to 70% casualties, requiring reconstitution. The European Council on Foreign Relations assessed in December 2025 that while Russia nominally has around 40,000 ground forces near the Baltics, intelligence estimates suggest only 2 brigade tactical group equivalents actually remain near Estonia, both under strength. This creates a paradox that cuts both ways. Russia's current forces near the Baltics are weaker than at any point in recent memory, but Russia's capacity to regenerate those forces, given time and the end of Ukraine operations, remains formidable. Ukrainian General Syrsky estimates Russia's overall mobilization capacity at 20 million people, with 5 million having military training. The arithmetic favors the side that can mass forces faster. And in the Baltic theater, geography massively favors Russia. Russian forces can reach the Lithuanian border within hours using existing infrastructure. NATO reinforcements must travel hundreds of kilometers across multiple national borders through potential choke points under the threat of Russian air power and missiles. A 2019 Brookings analysis suggested Russia could probably muster closer to 200,000 troops with little effort under the guise of an exercise. NATO's response time, even with the new 300,000-strong rapid response force, operates on different timescales entirely. General Jürgen Joachim von Sandrart, commander of NATO Multinational Corps Northeast, put it bluntly. The tripwire strategy was a doctrine of hope, and the limited Allied presence in the Baltics was insufficient to halt a large-scale Russian attack. So if current forces are insufficient, what would actually be enough? This is where expert opinion begins to diverge sharply. Since you have made it this far, you are clearly interested in European defense and military strategy. If you are finding value in this breakdown, please consider subscribing and dropping a like. It helps more than you might think. Now let's continue. Not everyone agrees that the situation is as dire as the RAND Wargames suggested. The European Council on Foreign Relations released a comprehensive reassessment in December 2025, and their conclusions offer a more nuanced picture. The report, authored by Jennifer Kavanagh, a former RAND analyst herself, and Jeremy Shapiro, argues that 3 years of observing the Ukraine conflict have revealed critical lessons that favor defenders. First, defense is stronger than offense in modern warfare. Ukraine has demonstrated that even outgunned forces can impose devastating costs on attackers. Second, artillery remains decisive, and NATO precision-guided munitions provide qualitative advantages that partially offset Russia's quantitative edge. Third, drones have revolutionized both reconnaissance and strike capabilities, and Western technology maintains significant leads in this domain. The European Council on Foreign Relations concluded that neither scenario, a conventional invasion or a hybrid attack, could succeed strategically today, or for about 5 to 10 years after the end of the Ukraine war, even with minimal US assistance. This assessment suggests that Germany's Brigade, combined with other NATO forward deployments, may provide adequate deterrence during a crucial strategic window while Russia reconstitutes its forces. But critics counter that deterrence and defense are fundamentally different concepts. The Heritage Foundation argues that the only way to guarantee the security of the Baltic states against a conventional Russian military threat is by having robust troops and military capabilities on the ground. Baltic states are too small to rely on a strategy of defensive depth. The Baltic states themselves have dramatically increased their own contributions. Lithuania now commits 5 to 6% of gross domestic product to defense, the first NATO nation to meet the target floated by the Trump administration. Estonia maintains wartime strength of 43,000 ground forces, including reserves mobilizable within 24 hours. All 3 Baltic nations are constructing a joint defense line, a network of trenches, bunkers, observation posts, and anti-tank obstacles stretching along their borders with Russia and Belarus. Estonia alone is spending $576 million on military infrastructure through 2028. FPRY analyst Lucas Malevsky notes the improvement. He says each Baltic state is defended by at least one division, a dramatic change from 2014 when defense was measured in battalions. Yet he cautions these forces remain substantially works in progress, substantially light infantry, and with comparatively few combat support enablers. Germany's own capabilities face serious questions. German Parliamentary Commissioner for Armed Forces Eva Hogel's 2025 report found that the Bundeswehr still has too little of everything, failing recruitment targets, with aging forces and inadequate infrastructure. Lieutenant General Alphonse Mayes warned that German forces are only 60% equipped, potentially dropping to 55% if the Lithuania Brigade draws resources from other units. 2 critical capability gaps were identified for the brigade: drones and short-range air defense. Acquisition of these systems, ECFR analysts say, might well stretch beyond 2027. Germany is making its largest military commitment since reunification, yet the force being sent may lack components needed for modern warfare. The brigade will deploy to a theater where the math still favors the adversary, during a window of relative Russian weakness that may not last. The honest assessment is that 5,000 German troops represent something genuinely historic and strategically meaningful, but they cannot alone transform the fundamental calculus of Baltic defense. What would transformation actually require? Return to the RAND prescription. 7 brigades minimum, 3 of them heavy armored formations, with robust air defense and artillery support. Current NATO deployments, at full implementation in 2027, will reach perhaps 4 brigade equivalents in the Baltic states proper. Poland hosts additional forces, including roughly 10,000 American troops, but those are not positioned for immediate Baltic defense. The 300,000-strong NATO response force announced at Madrid represents the reinforcement pool, but reinforcement assumes time that may not exist. Moving heavy armored formations across Europe requires weeks of preparation, secure logistics corridors, and airspace that Russian standoff weapons from Kaliningrad would contest from hour one. The critical variable is time, not just response time in a crisis, but the strategic time available before Russia reconstitutes its forces following operations in Ukraine. ECFR analysts argue this strategic window lasts 5 to 10 years after Ukraine operations conclude. If NATO uses that period to implement forward defense plans, preposition equipment stockpiles, complete the Baltic defense line, and build up host nation infrastructure, the calculus shifts toward deterrence by denial rather than punishment. Germany's Brigade serves as the anchor of this strategy in Lithuania. The Leopard tanks and Puma infantry fighting vehicles represent genuine combat power. Permanent stationing means forces are already in place rather than requiring deployment during a crisis. The political symbolism, Germany reversing 8 decades of post-war military restraint, sends a signal that cannot be easily dismissed. But the honest truth is this: if Russia decided tomorrow to execute a full-scale assault on the Baltics with every available formation, the defense would fail. NATO forces would be overwhelmed. The capitals would fall within days rather than hours, only because current Russian capability is degraded by operations in Ukraine. The strategy is not to win that initial fight. It is to make that fight unwinnable for Russia as well, to ensure any aggression would trigger a NATO-wide response that Moscow cannot afford, to buy time for reinforcement, to impose costs that no rational adversary would accept. Lithuanian President Gitanas Nausėda called the German brigade Lithuania's Plan B, given concerns about U.S. reliability. That framing captures something important. This is not a plan to defeat Russia in the field. It is a plan to ensure Russia never tests the question. Whether that is enough depends on assessments of Russian intentions, European resolve, and American commitment that no wargame can definitively answer. 80 years of restraint, billions of euros in investment, Germany's largest foreign military commitment since World War II, and still, the math does not add up. 5,000 soldiers, 44 Leopard tanks, 1 brigade where 7 were prescribed. Historic by any measure, but insufficient by Rand's arithmetic. The German brigade cannot stop Russia alone. No single deployment could. What it can do is raise the cost of aggression, anchor a broader alliance commitment, and signal that the era of German military restraint has definitively ended. The question now is not whether 5,000 troops are enough. The question is whether NATO will use the window Russia's Ukraine losses have created to build something that actually is. The tanks are in Vilnius. The clock is running. That question remains unanswered. If you found this analysis valuable, consider subscribing for more content on geopolitics and military strategy. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and the discussion often adds perspectives I had not considered. Thank you for watching.